historical prophecy, letting us know what would happen to the people of God in the time that would follow Daniel. So Daniel is receiving a prophecy here, and we'll talk some more about those details in just a moment. Before we do, let's begin with a word of prayer. Our Almighty God and Father, thank you so much for today and the time we have to study your word, to see the truth, the faithfulness, the compassion and mercy that you show on every page. Thank you for being a God who answers our prayer. Thank you for being a wonderful Father who cares for us and loves us deeply. We pray that as your children and as your servants, we would faithfully study your word this morning, understanding the truth and the faith that we see written on the pages today. God, thank you for all the ways you have worked to provide us salvation and justification and hope. You are truly unlike any other God that man has thought up or considered. You are the only true God, the only one worth serving, the only one worth loving. Help us to worship you every day of our lives. This we pray in your Son and our Savior's name. Amen. All right. Daniel chapter 11. If I remember correctly, we left off around verse 35, kind of got through that section. And I was making some comments at the end of last class that are actually going to come up again here in just a moment in the following section, so we'll tie into that connection here in just a moment. As we've been seeing, Antiochus Epiphanes is being spoken of here throughout Daniel chapter 11, especially the latter part of it, as Daniel is receiving a message, an answer to his question of what's happening, how long, God, like where's the plan here, what's going to happen to your people? We don't know the exact question, but we seem to get the answer here. We seem to see that God is answering what's going to happen to the nation of Israel, even as they go back from captivity. As they go back to the promised land and they seem to be getting a restoration, Daniel's getting clarification that there's going to be a battle for who controls Israel, who controls the promised land. And we're in the thick of watching Antiochus the fourth, Epiphanes, do as he wants. He is continuing to do whatever he wills, and has in multiple times come in and killed or persecuted the Israelites. And so at the end of verse 35, it says that some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. One of the final things we talked about is that in all of this turmoil, all of the back and forth of who's in control, the north, the south, all these different kings, all these different powers, that those who are faithful and wise, those who are going to teach others of the wisdom of God and be faithful to Him and not be caught up in who's in control, that they will be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end. Okay, so there's this message of hope and purpose that this is supposed to refine the people of God. And with that, then, let's jump into verse 36 through 39. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. All right, take a moment with those verses. Consider them, mark up any questions or observations you have, and then we'll talk about it in a minute. All right, what do you notice here, or what questions do you have? Aaron.
In verse 37, this king distinguishes himself by rejecting his father's God and putting himself in the place of all other gods.
Yeah, not only rejecting his father's gods, but the one whom is beloved by women. Well, so he's just rejecting all the gods, and as you said, making himself a god almost, right? He's making himself the God that he wants people to worship. He's at least viewing himself as the all-powerful, that no one can destroy me. Pretty proud of himself, isn't he? Who is this king? Did anyone look that up? Have you considered? Dave? Okay. Well, that's what we do. We take stabs at it. That's okay.
Excuse me. I can't pronounce his name.
Antiochus.
Epiphanes.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
And so what we see here, I think, and we'll test this out as we continue studying, we're going to see from verse 36 through roughly verse 45 and even into the beginning of chapter 12, what seems to be a retelling of what has happened earlier in chapter 11. So we're not seeing Antiochus continue and take a new trajectory or a new king take over, but we're going to see a lot of the symbolism repeated. So we need to be watching for that. And then ask ourselves, why the repeat? So that's what I want us to be thinking as we continue talking about this section. So what else do we notice about Antiochus? Or, sorry, this king, verse 36 and following. Fall into my own traps here. Dave.
He did his own will.
Yeah, he does as he wills.
Got corrupted because that's something that we need to take note of, is that when we depend upon our will, we're easily corrupted by things as human beings. And he's no different. He was no different. And he did that.
Absolutely. And what we actually see is, to your point, Dave, some people don't learn from that. In fact, Antiochus doesn't learn from that. Because this is the same phrase that's used to speak of the two previous kings before him. Or to speak of the previous king before him and himself. We see back in verse 3 of chapter 11, it says, "Then a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills." Then speaking of Antiochus in verse 16, "But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in glorious land with destruction in his hand." This idea that the kings of the earth seem to do as they will. They don't serve a God anymore. Aaron.
Yeah, and that's the motivation that any person has to reject the existence of God, is so that they can do what they want.
That's right.
And so, nothing's changed. There's also a trust in military prowess and, technology, if you can call it that, back then. The walls, the fortress, the technology, military power that they had, that's where this trust is being placed. Same thing today. A lot of people have, they trust in the security and the power of the country that they live in, rather than the God that established it.
Yeah, and that's something interesting about what goes on here, is we can track some of the ideas that he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers. And if you go look at Antiochus's life, he ends up bringing in the god Zeus to replace Apollo. So he's getting rid of his father's gods and bringing in his own gods. And then some would say, and this I have no reason to object, but as he says in verse 37, or to the one beloved by women, we see in Ezekiel 8, verse 14, that there's one that is beloved by women that's called Tammuz. So that is likely the god that's being referred to here. We have a reference to this one that is beloved by women. But uniquely to all this discussion, there was no military god known that he served. So there wasn't a god of fortress. And I think that goes to what Aaron was talking about, is he's made a god out of something that is not known as a god, which is really where we need to consider how are we doing as we will, is that we can fall into the same trap and make a god of anything, right? It can be a god of fortress. It can be god of money. It could be a god of fame. It can be a god of having a certain look. It could be a god of anything. That we can turn anything into a god and worship that and become one who chases after it and honors it with gold and silver and precious stones and costly gifts. We'll pour a lot into trying to get whatever we desire. Dave.
They have these gods, and as us, we do too.
Yeah.
I think they're part of it. They pick them because they don't answer back. God answers. Our God, the true and living God, answers back.
Yeah.
But I know it sounds simplistic, but I think it's true, because they're looking for what they want when they approach this false God.
Right.
And the God doesn't answer, but they, through whatever corruption and stuff, they gain abundance. So that, he must be answering me. That's part of the problem with our religious society today, is that they do stuff and we're all blessed because look how much money we're raking in and blah, blah, blah. And it's just a good thing to remember that our God will answer us.
Right.
He promised he would.
Absolutely.
And
we have so many examples throughout Scripture of where he takes active approaches and interaction with his people to show that he is a God who is present and desires to have that relationship. And that's important to see. Now, to add to Antiochus thinking highly of himself, do you know what Epiphanes means? We say it's an epiphany, which means, it just came to me. It's not what it means. Epiphanes means God manifest. So Antiochus thought so highly of himself that Antiochus IV was not good enough. And he became known as Antiochus IV Epiphanes. I am God manifest. I am the king that God chose. I am God himself. He seemed to think that I am God's gift to man. And he acted as such. Sean.
I think two things are great. Wasn't Antiochus Epiphanes made to bow the knee to Rome, like by force?
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's
and we're going to talk about that again, for sure.
Kind of funny. But I also think it's interesting I read a couple of different translations of chapter 11. And in verse 37, it's talking very clearly to me. about the gods that he's worshiping.
Sure.
Or to the one beloved by women is mentioned there. And a few of the translations say, or to the desire of women,
Okay.
indicating that it could be referring to like the abomination of homosexuality. But he's married, and he's also, there's no extra biblical evidence to that. But I thought that was interesting that that's what they assumed in earlier translations. Well, he's a bad dude, so that's bad, so they must go together.
Interesting.
But that's not what it seems to be here,
Yeah.
as the more accurate translations are reflected. But you may read that in other, like King James,
Sure.
New American Standard, stuff like that.
Okay, good. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Verse 39, he shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Who would that be? If he thinks of himself as God and he worships the God of fortresses and he's doing all this, what might the text be referring to? Another ruler. He might be getting help from an outside country who serves another god, so it'd be a foreign god in that sense. There's also the possibility of reading it, and I would say this is not critical to the text and understanding, but I think it's good for us to consider that possibility of it being a foreign god could be the way that the Jews would worship their God as apostasy Jews, or those who would reject God and come and submit to Antiochus. As we read earlier in chapter 11, that they would submit to him, which means they are now worshiping a foreign god. They're not worshiping the true God if they're going to turn his back on him and worship in a profane way. They're worshiping a foreign god. So they've made up their own form of God, taking pieces of the Jewish God that they like and taking pieces of Antiochus and forming their own foreign God. And we see the Jews do that. That number of them would side with Antiochus and be okay with him oppressing their fellow Jews and the fellow Israelites. So and so that's just a thought to consider. When Eric Borlaug was here just a few months ago, he and I were talking after one of the classes or sermons, and he was mentioning how, and I get the point, is as we talk more and more to people of faiths that seem to get so much wrong about scriptures, it becomes more apparent that they are serving a God that we do not serve. Because they're serving a God that meets their needs, that allows them to do as they will, right? And so they've got this foreign concept of who God is and their ability to serve him on their terms. And we should look at it that way. We don't serve the same God if you're not submitting to him exactly as he asks you to. You're submitting to your own form of a God that makes you feel good and makes you feel like you're going to get that salvation. And so I think that this might be one of those texts that can kind of uncover that. Ultimately, though, how does this king operate, as we see at the end of this section? What do you notice about how this king operates? Quid pro quo. Gary. Quid pro quo.
Okay, well,
Would you put that in English for us?
he honored people a lot that was on his side.
Yeah. Yeah, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Quid pro quo. Quid pro quo. Don't say that 3 times fast. My goodness. Can't even say it 1 time fast. But yes, he will honor those who honor him. You give me the praise and adulation that I think I deserve as the king and as a God, and I'll reward you. There's also another side, though. I'm sorry? Well, he's going to whoop you, but here it doesn't seem so much that it's the whooping that he's alluding to, although he does divide, so he's conquering and creating division. Oh, okay, yeah, so the idea of his conquering throughout, especially verse 39, and then at the end of 39, he'll do it for a price. He can be bought. That's a pretty messed up God. If I can just come in and buy whatever I want from you, get you to say whatever I want you to say. make me the high priest if I want you to make me the high priest, as we saw was done during that time. All right, we can come back to parts of this if we see some more ties, but let's continue then in verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and many ships. And he shall come into countries, and it shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand: Edom and Moab, and the main parts of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. All right, take a moment there, and then we'll talk about it. All right, what do you notice or what questions do you have? Karen? The whole of 36 and on, is that what you're saying? It could be viewed through Rome, but let's break this down a little bit. Let's look at some of the details here, because I think you're going to see that I think we can really make a case that it's still Antiochus. And I think that's because we're seeing, again, a lot of the retelling of what we just read. Now, I didn't see or really dive into how this would apply to Rome, so I'm not opposed to looking at it through that lens, because the end is still the same, right? Where we're going with this narrative still remains the same, is that whoever this king is, they come to an end. And it could be dual, and I think we're going to even point out that we should see it in a way that's continuing to see it as a fluid idea that gets repeated over and over. That we'll see it in a more literal sense fulfilled in maybe one situation that seems to make the most sense, but even in the New Testament, they pull this language from different places to show that it's well past what we would even see it as and plays a part throughout. So before we get there, what else do we see in here? What details stand out to you, or what questions do you have? You look unconvinced that you have a comment, or I'm not sure if you have a question.
It just seems like it's still Antiochus, and that Antiochus is the one who pitches royal tents, but that the one he's concerned about from the east and the north that terrifies him will be Rome.
Okay. Yeah, so that's one way to look at this is verse 44. News from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And then, of course, verse 45, pitching his palatial tents between the sea and the mountain. Now, if it's Rome, that would mean that we're seeing the north as Rome. That was generally considered the direction that they would come from. And that if they would come in support of Judea and Samaria, which would be to the east. So that would be that terrifying news comes from the east and the north. So we're seeing it coming from both opposing nations. And he goes, oof, I got to take care of this. So what does he do? Rides into battle. This is good. Like, he goes and does that. Is there another option? Ida has a thought, maybe to that question or not.
I think sometimes we tend to forget that the Parthians are still around, or the Scythians, and they arose at this time and actually fought against the Seleucids, and they would be from the east, because they're from the area that we think of as Iran, and so they would be coming from the east and then down from the north, and they were very powerful, and in fact they were a thorn in Rome's heel the whole time.
Yeah, and in fact, to kind of back that up, when it says at the end of verse 45, he shall come to his end with none to help him, Antiochus actually dies in it while he's waging war against the Parthians. But it's not under attack of sword. He dies by disease. While he's waging war, he comes to his end with none to help him. There was no one who could help him. He died of a disease in 164 BC. So that may confirm the approach that it would be the Parthians coming from the north and the east. There is yet a third option that this could be, and maybe it's a combo of all three applying again. The third option being, if he has done, as the text says in verse 43, that he has, or 42 and 43, that he's gone down to Egypt and he has conquered them and is enjoying all the wealth there. Do you remember what happens while he's in Egypt? We talked about this earlier in the chapter. Something happens back in Jerusalem. That Jason hears that Antiochus has died in Egypt in battle. And so what does Jason start to do? He starts going after the high priest position back in Jerusalem. Well, if you look at a map, you have Egypt and you have Jerusalem. Jerusalem is to the north and to the east. However you look at it, he becomes troubled by this news, and he goes after it and goes out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction, which we talked about. If it's Jerusalem, he ends up killing 80,000 people in Jerusalem. He's a man of destruction. Okay? We see ties to verse 25 even from, okay, so look at the end of verse 40. The north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. We saw Rome do that in verse 25 when they send the ships of Kittim, right? They're sending in those ships to do destruction, and it's coming against him. And so we see a retelling of a number of these things that are talked about in 40 through 45, and even back through verse 36. Why this retelling? Why this doubling of the story in chapter 11? A prelude to chapter 12? Possibly. One commentator I was reading, it's a recapitulation of chapter 11 and the earlier parts. And I'm like, that's a big word. I don't like that one. But it was fun to say. I had to make Ida proud. Say a big word, multiple syllables. It's a recap. All right. I like it. So now she goes down to 2 syllables for me. I like that. I think what we're seeing here, if I were to pin this in for myself, in the early part of chapter 11, Daniel's getting a response. What's going to happen to the people of God? What's going to happen to us, God? How are you going to restore us? What's going to take place? He waits 21 days while he's praying, and then this angelic presence, this heavenly being comes and starts telling him a message. And what's the message? Going to get a lot worse. There's going to be king after king waging war, trying to take control of Israel, and the Jews are never going to have peace in those periods. There's not going to be much to look forward to. Is that the message you were looking for as a person of faith, crying out? Having been in captivity for 70 years, waiting for God to respond and fulfill his promises to redeem his people, to bring them back and to bring them back to the promised land, that now we're going to go back and it's going to be a constant turmoil? What did we notice in that first section, though? In the midst of all that turmoil, there were signs of hope. The point that is made in the first section, I think as we concluded in verse 35, where that section ends, he's making a point that if any one of the people that were there in Israel or had experienced this turmoil, if they remain wise, they're going to stumble, they're going to have pain, they're going to go through the turmoil, they won't go unscathed, but it's so that they're refined, purified, and made white until the end of the time, for it still awaits the appointed time. There's a point to it. And there's hope for the people that endure these things. Now, Daniel might have heard this, and then what's his follow-up question? As with any of us who go through a trial, even one that we know we're in the right, but we're getting persecuted for, what do we always want for the other person? I want justice. I want to know that you're going to hold them accountable. And what happens? The angel then goes on, verse 36 through 45, to retell the story with a focus completely on the king and his end in the matter. That it's a reminder that at the end of all things, he shall come to an end with none to help him. There will be no help for him. There will be no restoration. He will be held accountable. I think that's the point. He's telling the story twice. Once for Daniel to see what's going to happen to the people and where's the hope. And then the other side to be reminded that in all of that, in all that this king wants to do, it's not going to serve him at all. He will come to an end. Thoughts or questions on that or anything else in this section? Scott?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this as in the light of God's going to be silent when they get out of captivity, and things are going to get quiet, and so He's left this for them to know that He's still involved, He's still acting, and all of that. And one of the things they needed to learn was to get rid of idols in their lives and treat Him the way He needs to be treated, the respect that He needs to have, the fear. And in that retelling, you see what's the downfall of this great Antiochus Epiphanes and his ways. And points out that he does his own will, he serves other gods, new gods even, no matter what. All of these idols come to nothing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like maybe that's part of the reasoning behind it is this is what it gets you. It causes a lot of trouble. It may even feel like victory for a time, but you're going to lose.
Yeah.
And the one that is left is God again, that's in control and has the bigger picture. And so they get to watch that get played out and see it happening as it was predicted. And I think it gives them hope in the hope. Hope in what has been given to be hope.
And hope in their God.
Is written. Yeah.
Right? Hope in their God that He's going to work all things for good. Ida had a thought over here.
This is kind of piggybacking onto Scott's point, but this, it's one thing to say, well, don't worry, everything's going to be taken care of.
Yeah.
But, wow, when you see all kinds of bad things happening and everything like that, it's okay, it's going to be taken care of. But then to actually see that these bad things are going to happen, but it's in control, it's under the power of God, and then there's going to be a reckoning.
Yes. Absolutely. There's a comfort that comes from that. You know, even as we were talking, you mentioned silence, Scott, and, you know, we often refer to this period between the Old Testament and the New Testament as 400 years of silence. And certainly, God is silent in that he's not revealing anything new. But this text is him speaking in that moment. This text is talking about what's going to happen in those 400 years. So that as the people watch these things unfold, they should be able to reflect back and go, oh, that lines up. Just as we've been doing with the text, we're able to look back and go, look at this king that lines up here. Look at this king that lines up here. Look at the way they fit the mold. And we see God's faithfulness and his ability to see what would happen in the future. And that provides us confidence and hope and peace in knowing that God's in control. Aaron, and then Lito.
Yeah, and kind of going back to verse 36, that statement, he shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, it's both comforting and also cause for alarm as well. I mean, you just because you're prospering and doing well doesn't mean that you are right with God.
Right.
And I think, you know, we also, if you're suffering and having a hard time, doesn't mean you're wrong with God. So I just think we need to evaluate where we are, not based on our circumstance, but based on our decisions in our life in accordance with what God says.
Absolutely. And just to clarify a detail here, not what you said was great. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished. What's the indignation here? Specifically, if we're seeing it through the Antiochus lens. His death? I think this refers back to verse 31, the abomination that makes desolate. It's just another way of saying he's going to create a real problem. The indignation is accomplished. The abomination that makes desolate. Basically, from the time that he destroys the temple on, 167 BC, he's on downfall. Rome's pressing on him, and he ends up losing against the Parthians, and he ends up dying within 3 years. So he goes from this all-high mighty king that's a god himself to the moment that he does this indignation, that's the end of him. Once you attack God directly, you're done. And that's what we see. We talked about this in, I think it was Jeremiah or one of our other studies recently, is the idea of when you go directly against God. This isn't just I made a mistake or I messed up. When you go directly against God, that is your demise. And that would be Antiochus' demise as well. Lito.
It's amazing that you mentioned those things. And as we mentioned a while ago, that Epiphanes means God is manifest. I think God has been using Antiochus to come to realization of the Jews and the Israelites, what they were doing. And at the same time, as you mentioned also that 167 BC, he took away everything. He destroyed, second time, the temple. Yeah. He took away the Sabbath. He took away circumcision. He took away the religious practices of the Jews. And then in the later time, the people came to realize all these things.
Yeah.
Rome used Epiphanes
absolutely
to manifest God.
Yeah.
In reality.
Yeah, and you see that as much as Antiochus thought he was God manifest, God still manifests his power in control over the rest of the kings and the kingdoms. Sean, we got the mic gone, so you'll just have to speak up.
No worries. So the Parthians end up taking over the Seleucid Empire.
Yep.
Is this considered the pivotal point where Antiochus dies and no one replaces him? So the Parthians take over, but they don't really care about Israel. They kind of do your thing, and they go back to where Iran kind of is. That's kind of a takeaway for geopolitical.
Yeah, I think so. I think what we're seeing here, just to confirm for those that are going to listen back, is the idea that the Parthians take advantage of this opportunity that Antiochus dies. They take control of the land, but they're not so focused on the Israelites. They weren't in a power play for Jerusalem.
I'm not sure the Parthians care about Rome so
Right, and they weren't trying to attack Rome. They weren't trying to attack Egypt. They weren't trying to press out further. I think they were just taking care of the of Antiochus, and so then you get this period where there's not that struggle ongoing. Ida has some thoughts there.
Not a big thought, but this is a lot of stuff to happen in 3 years.
Yes.
It's a lot.
It is a lot of stuff. And I think, as we'll talk about next time, because we're about out of time, but I think that's partly what is being talked about as we go on in chapter 12, that at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge over your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as has never been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. If you consider 167 to 164 BC, this time we're talking about, and even Antiochus's time in his early reign, he creates so much trouble for the people. And even through the whole prophecy, there's so much trouble that takes place during this period. Unlike the Israelites had seen, so much back and forth and constant turmoil. Sure, the Assyrians had come, but that was a one and done for a number of years. Then the Babylonians come, one and done for a number of years. But this is a period where it just seems like there's no rest. King after king, nation after nation coming through and taking control of your land and your home and forcing you to comply, and then here comes another one. That's a turmoil, that's a trouble such as no one has seen in any nation up till that point. And so what's going to happen then is God's going to explain what's going to happen as a result of that. What should we look for? How do we endure this? And what's the point of all this taking place? We'll wrap up chapter 12 hopefully next week, which means we are due for a new book. And we are going to be doing Hebrews after this. So I'll be getting books made this week and have those out for you to start your study. Hopefully by Wednesday, definitely by Sunday, I'll have those out. So looking forward to wrapping up Daniel and then getting into Hebrews in a couple weeks here. Appreciate your attention. We'll take a break and then enter into our services.